Prayer is not words spoken into the air. It is the bold assumption of the wish fulfilled. It is not begging, pleading, or hoping for change. Prayer is the confident acceptance of your desire as already accomplished. To pray is to enter the feeling of the answered prayer and to rest there as though it were the most natural thing in the world. The world has taught you that prayer is asking, but I tell you true prayer is receiving. It is claiming within your imagination that which only you can give yourself, the certainty that your desire already exists in the unseen. When you clothe yourself in the mood of fulfillment, life itself bends to mirror your inner conviction. If you seek health, then in prayer you walk as though healed. If you seek love, then in prayer you feel cherished and wanted. If you seek abundance, then in prayer you rejoice as though wealth already surrounds you. This state of inward satisfaction is the prayer that never fails. Practical prayer is simple. Close your eyes, withdraw from the world of facts, and step boldly into the reality of your desire. Feel its aliveness, savor its presence, accept it with gratitude. Persist in that feeling until it takes root within you. Your outer life is nothing more than the echo of your inner assumptions. Change the assumption, and the echo must change. That is the law. So tonight, when you pray, do not beg, assume. Do not question, believe. Take your desire into imagination, feel it real, and know that the unseen is already fact. Prayer is the secret doorway to creation, and you hold the key in your consciousness. Prayer is assuming the wish fulfilled, for it is not the act of asking, but the art of claiming. To pray is to stand boldly in the feeling of your desire already realized, to wear it as a garment until it feels natural. You do not wait for evidence in the outer world, for the inner conviction itself is the evidence of things unseen. When you pray in this way, you shift your state of consciousness, and by law, the world must rearrange itself to reflect it. Prayer is not hope. It is the confident acceptance of completion. True prayer is receiving, not begging. For begging implies lack, while receiving affirms possession. When one begs, one declares to the subconscious that the thing desired is absent, and this very state of absence is what continues to be outpictured in the world. But when one prays by receiving, one accepts inwardly that the desire is already accomplished, and this assumption becomes the seed from which manifestation grows. To receive in prayer is to close the eyes to appearances and open the inner vision to fulfillment, to rest in the satisfaction of already having what the senses cannot yet confirm. This inner acceptance carries a feeling of relief, of joy, of peace, for it knows that creation is finished. Every state already exists, waiting only for you to occupy it by feeling. Prayer in its highest form is not a struggle, nor is it repetition of words, but a silent embrace of the reality imagined. The mind may argue, the senses may deny, but the act of receiving in consciousness is stronger than both, for the unseen shapes the seen. When you assume the state of the wish fulfilled, you have prayed effectively, for you have received within what must unfold. Without imagination is the place of answered prayer, for it is within imagination that the invisible becomes visible, and the unseen is clothed in form. Prayer is not a ritual performed by the lips, but an inward act of vision and feeling, a daring choice to step into the state where the desire is already fulfilled. The outer world is only a shadow of the inner life, and so to pray rightly is to enter imagination and see, hear, and feel what the senses in the waking world may deny. In imagination, all things are possible, all limitations are dissolved, and every outcome is available to the one who dares to assume it as true. When you pray in imagination, you are not pleading with a distant power, but uniting with the creative force that shapes reality itself. You are the operant power, and the world outside is compelled to echo the assumption you hold within. To imagine with acceptance is to plant a seed in consciousness, and the law of life ensures that seed will bear fruit in its season. The vision sustained inwardly must harden into fact, for imagination is the womb of creation. To live in imagination is to walk already in possession of your desire. It is to feel the joy of answered prayer before evidence appears, to celebrate the victory before it is declared, to rest in the assurance that what you have claimed inwardly is already yours. In imagination you can feast while in famine, walk in health while sick, dwell in love while alone, and rejoice in abundance while lacking. This is the secret of prayer. For imagination is the temple where the unseen is accepted as real, and what is real within must reveal itself without feeling, is the evidence of fulfillment. For nothing is real to you until it is felt. The mind may construct images, and words may shape desires, but it is only when the feeling of reality is embraced that prayer takes root in the subconscious. To feel a thing is to accept it, to make it alive within, to give it substance beyond thought. When you clothe yourself in the mood of the wish fulfilled, that feeling is the proof that the unseen has already been received. The world may not yet show it, but within consciousness the work is done, and feeling is the seal of completion. When you imagine yourself in possession of your desire and allow the emotion of fulfillment to saturate your being, you move beyond hope and enter certainty. Hope waits, but feeling lives as though it is already so. It is not enough to say, I am wealthy, I am loved, or I am healed. The words must be charged with the inner sensation that convinces the self it is true now. The body responds, the mood shifts, and a quiet confidence arises when feeling is genuine. That inner atmosphere becomes the invisible cause of the visible effect that will follow. Feeling transcends reason and silences doubt, for no argument can break the conviction that something is already experienced. You cannot be persuaded otherwise when you feel joy, as though the prayer were answered. When you feel gratitude, as though the blessing were already yours. The subconscious, being impressionable, accepts this feeling as fact and tirelessly expresses it in form. Life must mirror the conviction you have dared to embody. Therefore, do not wait for the world to convince you, convince yourself through feeling. Do not measure fulfillment by appearances. Measure it by the mood you sustain. If you persist in the inner satisfaction of already having, the outer must conform to the inner law. Feeling is not a byproduct, but the very essence of creation, the bridge between imagination and manifestation. When you sustain the feeling of the wish fulfilled, you stand in possession of the evidence that your prayer is answered. For what is felt within inevitably hardens into the fact without. What you accept inwardly manifests outwardly, for consciousness is the one and only reality. The outer world is nothing more than a mirror reflecting the inner states you have dared to occupy, and every circumstance you face is but the shadow cast by your assumptions. Life does not come to you by chance, nor is it governed by blind fate. It is ordered, shaped, and sustained by the beliefs you hold, and the feelings you consent to as true within yourself. The unseen is the cause, the seen is the effect. To accept something inwardly is to claim it as part of your being, and once accepted, it must find its way into visible expression. Consider that every desire you have is already finished in the invisible realm. The moment you long for something, it exists as a state of consciousness waiting to be entered. If you dwell in the feeling of lack, you remain in the state where your desire is absent, and life continues to echo that emptiness. But the instant you inwardly assume the mood of already having, you have accepted a new state, and the law of life decrees that this state will manifest outwardly. The acceptance is the creative act, and what you persist in accepting becomes your world. The subconscious mind is impressionable and does not argue with reason. It accepts what you feel to be true, whether good or bad, wanted or unwanted, and faithfully reproduces it in form. If you inwardly accept fear, then outwardly you meet the images of fear. If you accept joy, peace, and abundance, these two unfold as experiences in your daily life. The outer conditions are powerless in themselves, they are simply reflections of what has been accepted within. To master this principle is to take control of your destiny. You no longer wait for circumstances to shift before you believe. Instead, you choose inwardly what you wish to see and assume it as already yours. This act of inward acceptance requires imagination and faith. Imagination allows you to picture and feel the reality of your desire, while faith sustains the acceptance until it solidifies into fact. It is not labor or effort in the outer world that guarantees change, but the quiet conviction held within. When you awaken to this truth, you realize that the world around you is plastic to your inner assumptions. Relationships, opportunities, health, and wealth all bend to the state you occupy. The law cannot fail, for consciousness is always creating. You are never at the mercy of chance, but are always shaping your reality by what you accept as true of yourself and of life. Therefore, guard your inner acceptance carefully, for it is the seed of your tomorrow. Accept inwardly the noblest, the loveliest, the most fulfilling state, and persist in it until it feels natural. In time, without struggle or strain, the outer world must yield and reveal in form what you have already embraced in spirit. Prayer requires persistence in the feeling, for the act of assuming the wish fulfilled is not a fleeting moment, but a sustained inner state that must be held until it becomes natural. Many begin with enthusiasm, tasting the joy of answered prayer in imagination, yet soon abandon the state when outer appearances seem unchanged. But true prayer is not concerned with appearances, for it moves by the law of faith, and faith rests in the unseen until it hardens into fact. Persistence is the secret that transforms imagination into manifestation, for what you continually dwell upon must shape itself into your world. To pray effectively is to step into the feeling of fulfillment and to remain there as though it were already true. The senses may deny it, reason may contradict it, and doubts may arise, but persistence means you refuse to waver from the inner conviction. Just as a seed requires time to grow, so too does the assumption require nourishment through repeated attention and sustained feeling. Each time you return to the state of fulfillment in imagination, you water the seed, and in due season it must bear fruit. Without persistence, the seed withers before it can mature, but with persistence, it becomes inevitable. Persistence is not struggle, nor is it anxious effort. It is quiet faithfulness to the inner reality. It is choosing again and again to feel from the end rather than from the lack. When the mind is tempted to look at circumstances and declare failure, persistence redirects it back into the vision of fulfillment. When doubts whisper that nothing has changed, persistence answers with feeling, not with words, by sinking deeper into the mood of completion. This steadfastness impresses the subconscious, and the subconscious, once impressed, will tirelessly bring forth the outer expression. Prayer that lacks persistence becomes little more than wishful thinking, a temporary escape with no lasting effect. But prayer held with persistence moves mountains, for persistence convinces the self that the unseen is more real than the seen. The subconscious does not respond to fleeting impulses but to deep and repeated impressions. Each time you feel yourself already in possession of your desire, you carve a deeper groove in consciousness, and eventually that feeling dominates the inner climate of your being. Once it becomes dominant, the outer world has no choice but to conform. Persistence in prayer is also persistence in identity. It is not merely imagining events or things, but assuming a new self, a self for whom the desire is natural. To persist is to live in the state until it becomes your dwelling place, until you no longer visit it as a guest but inhabit it as your home. From that habitation the world is reformed. Therefore, when you pray, do not abandon the state too soon. Return to it morning and night, in silence and stillness, until it saturates your consciousness. Let the feeling of the wish fulfilled be your inner atmosphere, your secret dwelling, your unshakable conviction. In persistence, prayer becomes power, and what was once only imagined becomes the reality through which you walk. Gratitude seals the prayer, for it is the final touch that transforms imagination into conviction. When you give thanks not for what you hope will come, but for what you feel has already been accomplished, you close the gap between desire and fulfillment. Gratitude is the recognition that the gift is already received, that the invisible is already fact, that the unseen has been accepted as present. In prayer, imagination plants the seed, feeling gives it life, and gratitude seals it as complete, ensuring that the subconscious accepts it as reality. Without gratitude, prayer can remain a wish, but with gratitude, it becomes certainty, for gratitude is the language of possession. When you express gratitude in the act of prayer, you are not attempting to persuade an external power, nor are you waiting for conditions to change before you rejoice. You are rejoicing now because you know the change has already taken place within. Gratitude is evidence of faith, for only the one who believes the prayer is answered can truly give thanks. Gratitude is not a polite gesture. It is the living proof that you stand in the state of fulfillment. It is the attitude of one who has already received, and therefore it is the vibration that aligns perfectly with manifestation. To pray without gratitude is to leave the work unfinished, for the subconscious requires acceptance, not questioning, and gratitude provides that acceptance. It tells the subconscious, this is mine, this is done, this is true, and the subconscious responds faithfully by externalizing that conviction. Gratitude silences doubt, for the heart cannot give thanks and worry at the same time. When you are grateful, you rest in the joy of completion, and that resting becomes the channel through which creation moves without resistance. The power of gratitude in prayer is that it turns imagination into reality by making the feeling of possession natural. To imagine abundance and then give thanks for it is to convince yourself it is already present. To imagine love and then give thanks for it is to dwell as one already cherished. To imagine health and then give thanks for it is to feel vitality as though it were already coursing through your being. Gratitude makes the unseen tangible, for the act of thanksgiving places you firmly in the state of the wish fulfilled. Gratitude is also persistence in disguise, for each time you give thanks, you are reaffirming the truth of your assumption. Even when the senses deny, gratitude declares that the inner reality is greater than appearances. Each expression of gratitude deepens the impression upon the subconscious until the assumption becomes fixed and dominant. Once fixed, the outer world must shift to mirror it, for life can only reflect what you persist in accepting. Gratitude, therefore, is not just an emotional response, but a creative act, an intentional sealing of the prayer as answered. It is wise to practice gratitude not only in prayer, but in the rhythm of daily life. Let gratitude be your constant companion, for it keeps you in the state of fulfillment. Wake with gratitude as though every desire is already accomplished. Walk through the day with gratitude for blessings both seen and unseen. Retire at night with gratitude that the unseen power has already rearranged the world on your behalf. This unbroken atmosphere of thanksgiving ensures that your prayers are not undone by doubt or impatience, but are nourished by faith and joy. Gratitude seals the prayer because it is the consciousness of fulfillment itself. It is the state of already having, already being, already knowing. When you give thanks in prayer, you have moved beyond hope into certainty, beyond asking into receiving, beyond desiring into possessing. Gratitude makes the prayer whole, for it affirms the end as already achieved and leaves nothing more to be done. In gratitude, you have already touched the answered prayer. And because you have touched it within, you cannot be denied it without. Every state you occupy attracts its likeness. For life is forever reflecting back to you the consciousness in which you dwell. A state is not a passing thought or a fleeting mood, but a position of awareness, a dwelling place of the mind and heart, a lens through which you view yourself and the world. When you assume a state, you clothe yourself in its feeling, and that feeling draws to you circumstances, people, and events that correspond perfectly to it. The outer world has no choice but to arrange itself in harmony with the state you inhabit within, for consciousness is the cause, and the world is the effect. If you dwell in the state of lack, life cannot help but echo scarcity. Opportunities seem distant, relationships feel strained, and even blessings go unnoticed, for lack blinds you to abundance. If you dwell in the state of fear, then fear shapes your encounters, paints your experiences, and calls forth more situations that justify your anxiety. But when you occupy the state of abundance, life presents avenues of increase. When you occupy the state of love, you find yourself surrounded by affection, kindness, and connection. When you occupy the state of health, vitality seems to flow through your very being. Every state carries with it a vibration, a mood, a certainty, and it unfailingly attracts to you its likeness. To understand this is to grasp the secret of deliberate creation. You are not at the mercy of chance, for chance itself is only the outer name given to inner assumptions. The states you hold dominantly are silently drawing their likenesses into your life. You cannot hide from your state, for the world reveals it faithfully. Look at your outer world, and you will see the reflection of your inner dwelling place. To change the world, you must change the state you occupy. Every desire you hold is already a state of consciousness awaiting your acceptance. You do not create the state, it already exists in the infinite. All that is required is that you enter it and occupy it until it feels natural. When you wish for wealth, you are standing outside the state of wealth, desiring it as something apart. But when you assume the state of wealth, you feel its possession, you walk in its atmosphere, and soon the likeness of wealth flows into your world. When you long for love, longing itself is the state of absence, and it calls forth more absence. But when you assume the state of being loved, cherished, and wanted, life responds with relationships and experiences that match the feeling you carry. The key is persistence, for every state must be nourished until it becomes your dwelling. A moment of imagining is not enough if you quickly return to the old state of doubt and lack. You must abide in the new state, let it saturate your mind, and return to it again and again until it becomes your natural home. Once it feels natural, once you no longer strain to hold it, the likeness of that state will pour into your world with ease. States are not bound by time. The moment you occupy a state, its reality is secured within. Outer changes may appear gradually, but inwardly the prayer is already answered. Your persistence ensures that the outer must conform, for the law cannot be broken. Every state attracts its likeness. Do not be deceived by appearances, for appearances are only the lagging reflections of past states. Hold faithfully to the state you now choose, and its likeness must come forth. This truth makes you responsible for your life, for you cannot blame circumstances when they are only mirrors of the state you have occupied. But it also empowers you, for no circumstance is fixed, and no condition has power over you once you withdraw your acceptance from it. Choose a new state, dwell in it with feeling, and life will reshape itself accordingly. Therefore, let your imagination be the doorway to nobler states. Enter the state of freedom, of joy, of peace, of accomplishment, and walk as though it were already yours. Each state carries with it its own future, its own chain of events, its own world of experiences. By choosing the state, you choose the life that follows. Do not wait for life to change before you change your state, for life has no power apart from your inner dwelling. Occupy the state now. Persist in it until it feels natural, and trust the law that every state you occupy unfailingly attracts its likeness. Change assumptions, and life must change, for assumptions are the silent architects of your destiny. They are the unseen roots from which the visible branches of your life grow. What you assume to be true of yourself and of the world shapes every experience, every relationship, and every opportunity that comes to you. Life does not move by chance nor by accident, it moves by law, and the law decrees that whatever you consent to inwardly must be expressed outwardly. Your assumptions, whether noble or unworthy, faithful or doubtful, are the seeds planted in the soil of the subconscious, and the harvest cannot fail to resemble the seed. An assumption is not merely a passing thought or a fleeting idea, but a state of consciousness you accept as real. It is the conviction behind your imaginal acts, the feeling you return to when the world is silent. Even when you do not speak your assumptions aloud, they live within you, as the quiet background of your life, determining what you notice, what you attract, and what you experience. If you assume struggle, struggle follows you. If you assume rejection, rejection seems to appear at every turn. But if you assume favor, opportunities flow toward you. If you assume love, you find yourself cherished and wanted. Assumptions are not passive, they are dynamic forces shaping the unfolding of your reality. To change life, you need not fight against circumstances, for circumstances are only shadows cast by deeper realities. The true battleground is within. When you alter your assumptions, the shadow must shift accordingly. No outer resistance can withstand the persistence of a new assumption. You may look at your current world and see reasons to believe nothing can change. Yet those appearances are only the reflection of old assumptions already fading. The moment you take on a new assumption and persist in it with feeling, you plant the seed of a new world, and by law, the outer must conform in time. This change does not come by effort or by force in the external world. It comes by quiet conviction in the inner world. When you imagine a scene that implies your desire fulfilled and feel the reality of it, you are assuming a new state. If you persist in that feeling, the subconscious accepts it as true and life must echo it. The assumption becomes a law unto itself, compelling events, people, and circumstances to align with it. The outer world is plastic to the assumptions you hold dominantly. Consider how often people live bound by assumptions they never chose consciously. They assume they are unlucky, and so misfortune becomes a pattern. They assume they are unworthy of love, and so relationships reflect rejection. They assume wealth is scarce, and so scarcity colors every aspect of their experience. Yet all along, these are not facts but only assumptions, and the moment they are exchanged for new ones, life itself must rearrange. Assumptions are invisible chains or invisible wings, depending on what you accept. To change your assumptions requires imagination and faith. Imagination allows you to create the inner scene of fulfillment, and faith sustains your acceptance of it until it feels natural. You may be tempted to look outward for evidence, but the evidence appears only after the assumption is secured inwardly. The gardener does not dig up the seed each day to check its progress. He trusts the process. So too must you trust the unseen, knowing that once the assumption is made and persisted in, its fruit is certain. Persistence is the mark of true assumption. To change once and then revert to old doubts is to uproot the seed before it takes root. You must hold the new state with constancy, returning again and again to its feeling until it dominates your inner world. When it becomes natural, when it no longer feels like pretending but like reality itself, then the work is finished inwardly and the outer must bow to it. This is why Neville taught that assumption, though false when first assumed, if persisted in, will harden into fact. Changing assumptions also means changing identity. You cannot assume abundance while still identifying as poor. You cannot assume love while still identifying as unworthy. The assumption requires you to become a new self, to step into a new state of being. This new self does not struggle to make the assumption real, for it already lives as though it were real. In prayer, you take upon yourself this new identity and feel its truth. This is the essence of creation. Life never contradicts your assumptions, it only mirrors them. If you desire a better life, begin by assuming better things of yourself. Assume that you are worthy, that you are loved, that you are guided, that you are successful. Assume that life is friendly, that opportunities are abundant, that your steps are ordered. These assumptions, held faithfully, cannot fail to recreate your world in their likeness. The law is impersonal, it does not choose for you, but gives you exactly what you assume. Therefore, never despise the small beginnings of a new assumption. A single act of feeling the wish fulfilled, persisted in day after day, is enough to alter the course of your life. Your world is always reflecting your inner state, and by changing your assumptions, you change the reflection. You are never trapped by circumstances, for you can always assume differently. Every new assumption is a doorway into a new reality, and the moment you step through it inwardly, the outer must follow. Change assumptions, and life must change, for consciousness is the one and only reality, and what you dare to accept as true within yourself becomes the world in which you live. Prayer is creation in motion. For every act of prayer is the movement of consciousness into a new state of being. It is not words muttered into the air nor rituals performed by habit, but the deliberate shift of awareness into the reality you long to experience. Prayer is the invisible architect that constructs the unseen world of imagination and allows it to flow into the visible world of facts. To pray is to create, to imagine boldly, to assume firmly, and to feel the end as though it were already accomplished. Creation does not begin when the outer world changes. Creation begins in the invisible act of prayer, and that inner motion is what produces the visible transformation of life. The mistake many make is in believing that prayer is asking, pleading, or convincing a distant power to intervene. True prayer is not an act of begging, but an act of assuming. It is receiving in consciousness what you desire as already yours and living in the feeling of its fulfillment. When you pray in this way, you are not sending request outward, but awakening the creative force within yourself. You are moving into the state where the wish is fulfilled, and once you occupy that state, creation is set in motion. Prayer is not something that may or may not work. It is law, for every assumption persisted in must externalize itself. Prayer is creation in motion, because it begins with imagination. and imagination is the workshop of reality. In imagination, you see, hear, and feel what the senses may deny, and in doing so, you give life to the invisible. The unseen is more real than the seen, for the unseen is the cause, while the seen is only the effect. When you imagine with conviction, you plant the seed of creation, and that seed grows in silence until it becomes fact. Prayer is the conscious use of imagination, not to escape life, but to shape it. By living inwardly in the end, you set creation into motion, and the outer world must reflect what you have dared to assume within. To pray rightly is to live in the end, to feel the joy, gratitude, and satisfaction of already having what you desire. This feeling is not mere daydreaming, but the creative act itself. Feeling is the evidence of fulfillment, the proof that the unseen is already yours. Once the feeling is secured, creation is already underway. The outer may take time to catch up, but within, the prayer is finished. You need not repeat it with desperation, for prayer is not repetition of words, but persistence in the state. Prayer continues as long as you remain faithful to the inner reality, and the moment you accept it fully, the prayer is answered. Prayer requires persistence, for creation is motion sustained. A momentary assumption, quickly abandoned, cannot bring lasting change. Just as a seed requires care and consistency, so does an assumption require repeated attention until it takes root in the subconscious. Each time you return to the feeling of the wish fulfilled, you water the seed of creation. Each time you live in the joy of completion, you strengthen the motion of prayer. This persistence is not struggle but quiet faith, the willingness to return again and again to the inner vision until it feels natural. When it becomes natural, when the new state feels like home, then the prayer is complete and the outer must conform. Gratitude seals the prayer, for gratitude is the consciousness of already having received. To give thanks before the evidence appears is to declare that creation is already finished. Gratitude is not merely polite acknowledgement, but the living vibration of fulfillment. When you feel gratitude in prayer, you are no longer asking, waiting, or hoping, you are possessing. Gratitude is the stamp that finalizes the assumption, the proof to the subconscious that the end is real. With gratitude, the prayer is not left hanging, but is sealed in certainty. Every prayer is motion into a new state of consciousness, and every state has its own world attached to it. When you assume the state of wealth, life begins to rearrange itself to bring forth abundance. When you assume the state of health, vitality flows, and the body aligns. When you assume the state of love, affection, companionship, and kindness come to meet you. Each state contains its own chain of events, and prayer is simply your act of stepping into that state. You do not need to know how it will unfold. The law takes care of the bridge of incidents. Your task is only to occupy the state, and life will construct the path that leads to its outer expression. This is why prayer is called creation in motion. It is not idle wishing but active assuming. The motion is inward and the outer follows. You cannot occupy a state inwardly without calling forth its likeness outwardly. You cannot dwell in the state of joy without meeting joyful experiences. You cannot persist in the state of despair without attracting circumstances that justify despair. Every prayer is a seed of creation, and every prayer faithfully expressed in feeling must blossom into fact. To pray is to accept responsibility for your own creations. It is to realize that you are not a victim of chance, but the operant power of your own life. Prayer is not dependent upon the mercy of fate, but upon the faithfulness of law. The law is impersonal, responding always to the assumptions you persist in, whether noble or unworthy. Therefore, prayer is the key to transformation, for by choosing your assumptions, you choose your world. Prayer is also freedom, for no circumstance is final and no condition permanent. At any moment, you may withdraw from an old state and enter a new one. The past has no power once you assume differently. By prayer, you can dissolve limitations, overturn appearances, and rise into a higher vision of yourself. The change need not be gradual, for assumption can be made in an instant. The moment you feel the wish fulfilled, you have entered a new state, and creation is already in motion. The outer may take time to mirror it, but the inner work is complete. Thus, prayer is not weak, uncertain, or doubtful. It is the most powerful creative act available to man. It is the conscious use of imagination to live in the end, to assume the fulfilled desire, to persist in the feeling, and to seal it with gratitude. It is creation set into motion by your willingness to believe in the unseen. When you pray in this way, you are no longer hoping that life will change. You are changing it at its root. You are moving into a new state of being, and the likeness of that state must become your experience. Prayer is creation in motion because it is life itself in operation. Every man is praying whether he knows it or not, for every assumption held within is prayer, and every feeling sustained is creative. The question is not whether you are praying, but whether you are praying consciously. When you take hold of this truth and direct your assumptions wisely, you become the master of your destiny. You realize that creation is finished, that all states already exist, and that by prayer you select and occupy the one you wish to experience. By this motion of consciousness, unseen realities become visible facts, and the invisible world of imagination becomes the tangible world of life.